Hi guys, how are you? So welcome to the late night funky fermentation webinar. Thank you for coming and joining with me. If you're on the East Coast, it's late right now. I'm going to try and keep it down to an hour. If you are not on the East Coast and you're elsewhere, then it's either really late or really early. So awesome. Thanks, guys. So I want to encourage you guys to ask me questions in the chat bar on the side of your screen. Please feel free at any point. I'm going to post a couple of polls asking you guys questions kind of throughout this thing, and it's been kind of fun today. I've learned a lot from everybody. So we're just going to kick it off right now and post the first one. How familiar are you with fermentation? Please let me know. I would love to hear. Okay, so here's the basic gist. I'm going to give you guys a little bit of why I do this, and then I'm going to go through all of the different kind of ferments that I'm going to be making in my upcoming fermentation workshop. I'm going to tell you a couple of different ways of fermenting, why I like those ways, and all of the goodies that go along with it, and then throw a couple of recipes at you as well. So I encourage you to kick back, grab a bottle of kombucha, or maybe some other fermented beverage, wine, beer, and enjoy the show. You may even want to grab a pen or a pencil, or your favorite mode of electronic recording device, because I definitely have some cool information for you. As a disclaimer, I live in a warehouse in downtown Los Angeles, and they are filming a movie right outside my window. And my boyfriend has a dog boarding business. So if you hear dog barking or crazy things happening, they're filming a movie and we're full of dogs. So bear with me if it gets crazy tonight, okay? Hence this. I'm hoping it'll cut back on the background noise. So again, thank you so much for joining me here with this tonight, and I really do hope to answer all your questions. So please, feel free to ask. A little bit about me. I started off my life as a dancer, and I worked in companies from basically 3 to 23, and I learned a lot about nutrition in that time, obviously. I've learned a lot more since then, but I definitely learned a lot then. I also grew up in a less than wealthy family, and my mother had a garden, and if you wanted a snack, you could go outside and get one. We also are Polish, so things like sauerkraut were very familiar to me growing up. I imagine it's very much like being part of any kind of traditional style culture where you grow up having kimchi, or you grow up having miso, or you grow up having tepache, or whatever. So I imagine that most people who are lucky enough to have a very traditional foods family know a few things about fermentation, which is awesome. But that's where mine comes from. Mine started off in those Polish worlds of fermentation. And one of my favorite things is a fermented bread made out of buckwheat, which is gluten-free and fermented and delicious. And I suspect that because it's buckwheat, which is very familiar for us Eastern Europeans, that's why it does so well for me. Okay. As I transitioned from dancing into teaching fitness and working in restaurants and whatnot, I decided to go back to school to be a health coach. So now I'm actually a period coach, and I work with women to run their businesses and their lives and whatnot with their periods instead of against them. But in my health coaching classes day, I started a pop-up restaurant. And a pop-up restaurant was the business that I ran while I was going to school and learning more about fermentation, or learning more about female hormonal balance and digestive health. It's really one of the necessary ingredients to have a good hormonal balance, but it's also a necessary ingredient if you are any kind of athlete or human being, period. A lot of problems from your average run-of-the-mill allergies or acne or heartburn or digestive issues, acid reflux, hormonal imbalances, thyroid issues. All of these things can be brought back to inflammation. And one of the best ways to reduce inflammation is to have a healthy gut lining and a healthy gut. The only way to do that is to have fermented foods in your life. So I had this pop-up restaurant. I was learning about how to have a healthy gut. And I was doing a pop-up restaurant that the theme was, it was called Clean Dinners, and it was just clean whole foods. So no sugar, no gluten, a vegan entree, a happy meat entree, all sorts of vegan sides and desserts and everything, but everything was gluten-free, everything was sugar-free, and everything was made from organic fruits and vegetables. So when I made black bean burgers one time, I needed ketchup and mustard. And I didn't want to buy ketchup because it has high fructose corn syrup. Even organic ketchup has organic sugar in it. And I wanted to make my own ketchup, but when you're using tomato paste, you don't want to use tomatoes that are in a can. Even the BPA-free linings in cans still kind of creep me out because, I mean, it's got to have something in the lining. It's not just a tin can. So tomatoes are just really acidic. There's no way that they're not leaching something from the lining of the can. So I wanted to use glass. Now that's much more expensive. So how was I going to do that and make it worth my while trying to run a business, you know, and turn a profit? So I actually started making fermented ketchup and fermented mustard because I could just make a larger batch and then I could throw it in my refrigerator and it would keep for months. And I mean, my mustard keeps, I don't know, there's probably a jar in there that's been there for at least a year now. And the ketchup lasts for months. I mean, maybe 6 on the outside, but it lasts for a long time. So I realized that if I was going to do this pop-up restaurant and I was going to turn any kind of profit, save my money in supplies, that I needed to start fermenting as much as possible. And it would really help things keep. So I did. And in doing that, I started to realize, wow, I'm feeling better. Now all my condiments are fermented. I've got a little something fermented with every meal. And I was looking at all these traditional cultures and how they were traditionally eating, and they were all eating something kind of fermented with it. So I realized just how important it was to have fermented foods daily, if not with each meal in my life. And that really inspired me to do more. Through the pop-up restaurant, I started a fermentation farmer's market booth, and I sold fermented foods, condiments, krauts, kombucha, and basically the extras from the clean dinners from my pop-up restaurant at the end of the week. And it was great. And I did it for a couple of years, and it was a lot of fun, and I learned a lot, and I made a lot of crazy foods and a lot of crazy combinations. And I have made kombucha flavors and types and things that you just don't even know exist yet. So it's been a lot of fun. But that being said, that's why I teach this fermentation workshop. It keeps me going. It keeps my pantry full, and I love sharing what I'm doing with other people. So I'm really stoked to tell you guys about all of this stuff. So that being said, you want to ferment because you don't even know how good you're going to feel when you start eating ferments regularly. And I love it. And it's delicious. And you'll find something that you like, and it's going to just change the world for you. So, okay. How fermentation works. Here's the basics. The gist of fermentation is that you're creating an anaerobic environment. That means you're pulling the oxygen out of your jar, basically, the vessel that you're fermenting in, quickly, using all of the oxygen, pulling it out. And then everything that's under your brine, so if this is your jar and this is your brine level, everything that's under this liquid is in this anaerobic, oxygen-free environment. And that's preserved. That's going to be fermented. That's going to be safe, quote unquote. So anything that goes above that might be susceptible to mold. So you want everything underneath your brine at all time. And I'm going to talk about the brine line probably a whole handful of times today. All right. So when you're fermenting, you're growing bacteria. So basically whatever's in that jar, and let's just use sauerkraut, or let's use pickles for the sake of ease. You've got pickles, you've got any kind of seeds and flavors in there, and you've got cucumbers in there, and then you've got a salt brine in there, right? And you've got your spears in your jar, and then you've got that nice pickle brine on top, which is just salt water that you've poured in. This is what your pickles were going to turn into. So they're not vinegar, no vinegar used, just that salt brine. And that's traditionally how pickles were made. Those pickles are the food for your bacteria, just as it's food for you. So you're growing a little colony of bacteria on these cucumbers, and they're going to turn them into pickles for you. Your bacteria that you're going to be taking care of needs warm food, water, and time. So warmth. Typically you want them to be between 79 and 52 degrees Fahrenheit. I, again, live in a warehouse in downtown Los Angeles, and there are no temperature controls of any kind in here. So when it's 110 degrees outside, it's probably 110 degrees inside. And when it's cool outside, it's cool inside. So I do not even come close to making it within that range the majority of the time. However, I've never had a ferment die because it was too hot or too cold. If I had a ferment die, it's because I forgot about it and didn't take care of it properly. Totally happens. It's fine. So warmth. Can't be cold. In the refrigerator, it goes to sleep. So it has to be warm enough that the bacteria is awake. It will go slow, and then it'll go to sleep. So the next thing you need is food, which is whatever you're fermenting. There's sugar even in cabbage. So whatever you're fermenting, there's going to be enough sugar in that vegetable to feed the bacteria. You need water. Tap water is not going to work out for you. There's chlorine in tap water. You either need filtered water, spring water. You can use distilled water because you're adding salt to it, so that's not the end of the world, but filtered or spring water is your best option. And you need time. Depending on how warm it is in your house will change the time. So when you're looking at a recipe and it says, ferment for 3 days, or I say something like ferment for 3 days, that depends on how warm your house is. It could be 2 days. It could be 24 hours, 48 hours, 24 hours, somewhere in there. It could be 5 days. It depends on how hot or cold your house is. That target temperature is your target time. But when it's 110 degrees in my house, my kraut goes like crazy pants. I don't want it to be soggy kraut, so I check it fairly within a couple of weeks after putting it up to start fermenting. Whereas normally they would say, your fermentation sauerkraut takes 2 months. So time depends on your temperature really more than anything, but those time guesstimates are really there in the idea that you're in your ideal time temperature zone. So in the 60s, basically. All right. You also are going to use salt in the majority of your ferments, and you don't want to use crappy table salt. There's emulsifiers, which are chemicals in that salt, and the minerals and the goodness have been stripped out of it in order to refine it. So you want to use Celtic salt, pink Himalayan salts, red salt, black salt, lava salt, sea salt, any gray salt, anything but table salt. There's even a brand called Real Salt. Great. It's delightful. I do find with pink salt that it's a little bit less salty tasting. So I usually add just a little bit more than the recipes call for when I use pink salt. I like things to taste salty. If you're sensitive to salt, you may find that this is the perfect salt for you because you can still have the same amount of salt, but it doesn't have as much of that salty kind of sodium-y taste. All right, so those are the things that we're starting with. And one other note that I want to tell you about salt is that the reason we use salt in all of these savory ferments is because good bacteria, the bacteria that lives in your body or should be living in your body, thrives in that environment. Whereas when you're using not the wrong amount of salt or bad salt, the bad bacteria will live. So the good salt kills off the bad bacteria and encourages the good bacteria to thrive. And that bacteria in your gut outnumber your cells in your body. So if you want to stop thinking about yourself so much as you're nourishing you and more as you're nourishing the bacteria colony in your body that outnumbers you, you might want to do that. Just give them what they want. Give them good ferments. Help them grow to be healthy bacteria. It's your little personal colony, and it's unique to you. Every person's bacteria colony is different. So some people, they have found that in some cases, like depression, that the majority of people who suffer from depression have a similar microbiome, and it's different from people who don't. Also, obese people have a different microbiome than people who are of, I'm going to say appropriate weight, but that's terrible. I don't like it, but it's a different biology. So not to say that that means you're going to be like that. If you have depression, you have this different biology and your bacteria is different and you're just stuck there. Actually, great. Change the bacteria. See if it helps. It can't hurt. It certainly can't hurt. So change the bacteria. Try eating some fermented foods and see if you feel less fatigue. See if you feel less pain. I mean, I started doing a lot of this stuff because I had crippling cramps every month and I had crazy mood swing PMS and I was nauseous and throwing up for days on the first 2-3 days of my period. And I was really miserable. So I started doing this as part of trying to balance my hormones and fixing my gut health and just starting to incorporate fermented foods on a really regular, like with every meal basis, made a huge difference for me, even in my moods and doing nothing else. So of course, I did a lot of other things over time, but that's where I really started. And it really made a big difference, made me a really big believer in fermentation. So if you have any kind of health issues that you just are having a hard time dealing with, you might want to just start with something fermented and see how it goes. You could be really surprised. And the science is backing it up. So I really want to encourage you guys to do this, obviously. One last kind of general note about fermentation. Often you see recipes that say lacto-fermented whatever, kraut, lacto-fermented chutney, lacto-fermented fruit. It's not because you're fermenting with dairy, it's because you're creating lactic acid bacteria. That lactic acid bacteria is why it's called lacto-fermentation. It's actually got nothing to do with dairy. You can ferment with dairy, but that's not why it's called this. So if you see something that says lacto-fermented, don't be afraid of it if you're lactose intolerant or don't eat dairy for whatever reason. Okay, so earlier today in the poll that I posted that you've got on the side screen, we've had, so far, the majority of people have been in, how familiar are you with fermentation? We've got sorta, and I've heard of it. And only one person has said, this is really my first time learning about it. So that's cool. We only had one person who said very today. So I see you guys are keeping up the trend and pretty much everybody's in that mid-range part. So that's awesome. Cool. Thanks, guys. I'm going to toss up one more poll if you would like to play along with us. Okay, so when you're fermenting, you need to look at a few things: salt, water quality, warmth. You also need to think about what you're fermenting in. I get a lot of questions about fermenting in plastic. It stems from a fear of blowing up your glass bottles, and I get that, but you're not really a fermenter until you've blown up your first bottle. Everyone who has fermented a drink like kvass or kombucha has blown up a bottle. It's just a rite of passage in the fermentation world. You can ferment in plastic, but just like tomatoes, the fermentation process is highly acidic and it will leach the plastic into your food. And that's not the point of fermenting, right? So you want it ferment in glass jars or in crocks. Glass jars are great. You can get ball jars, you can get mason jars, easy peasy, don't have to think about it, don't have to worry about it. If you're like me and you love going to a good thrift shop, you're gonna find awesome glass jars and awesome crocks. And glass jars like these guys too, they're great for eternal brews. You wanna make sure, especially if the glass is made in China, that it's lead free. And the best way to do that is to buy a $10 home testing kit from Home Depot or whatever major chain. I'm sure they all have one, but I know the Home Depot here in LA has them. Just a $10 lead testing kit. And then you can test it and you know yes or no whether your glass has lead in it. And if it does, it's a great planter, no loss. And if it doesn't, then great, you are on. Get to fermenting. One of the awesome things about crocks is that they're great. There's people who make crocks specifically. There's a guy named Mark in the Wild Fermentation Facebook group. You'll know it because it's in all capital letters. And in that Facebook group, there's a gentleman named Mark who makes crocks and he sells them on Etsy. He makes them specifically for fermenting. It's amazing. So think about all the money you're going to save making your own sauerkrauts and fermented goodies at home, and take some of that money and support a local artist or perhaps our very own Mark from the Wild Fermentation Group and get one of his crocks and support an artist at the same time. So win-win, right? If you do get a crock and it's particularly pretty, the glazes sometimes contain cadmium, which also Home Depot sells a testing kit. So if you don't know where your containers are coming from, I highly suggest just double checking for them for lead or cadmium. And the kits at Home Depot are super cheap. So worth it for the health of you and your family. I have blown up a number of glass jars. Sorry, it happens. My favorite time ever, or I guess the best story, not my favorite time, but the best story was when I was fermenting kombucha for the farmer's market, and I had glass jars on my table, glass like the wine bottles with the swing tops, like a Grolsch bottle. And I had them on my kitchen table to ferment overnight, and at 5 a.m. one of them exploded. And the top shot up to the ceiling, and my whole ceiling and the walls and everything and the floors were covered in fruity kombucha. And I found glass as far away as the wall 1,000 feet on the other side of the apartment. I mean, I found glass when I moved out of that apartment. It was intense. I mean, I had to be up at 6 anyway to do the farmer's market. So I guess what's another hour at that point, though I would have preferred to sleep. But really, you gotta blow up a glass bottle. It's just part of fermentation. All right, so let me check in on this poll over here. Okay, so far everyone that's responded has said that they've never fermented anything, which is great. I really hope you guys get a lot of cool stuff out of this talk. And please, again, ask questions because I'm super happy to answer them. I mean, that's what I'm here for right now. That's why we're doing this live. I'm going to throw up another little poll here, you guys, at your leisure. Okay. So in my fermentation workshop, which you can do hands-on here in Los Angeles, or you can attend virtually just like this, we're going to do 6 weeks of fermentation, and then the 7th week is going to be a dinner party. So that, you know, kind of need to be here for my dinner, but you can follow along at home and make your own dinner. So week 1 of our workshop, we're going to make fire cider. What is fire cider? Fire cider is the cure-all to everything, or as my boyfriend likes to call it, witch's brew. It really does smell like a witch's brew. And all of us have at some point or another kind of forgot and taken the top off the fire cider and stuck our noses in it, and then tears just rolling down the face from just how intense that smell is. And I'm going to tell you what's in it and why that happens. But first off, fire cider is an anti-inflammatory, an immune system booster, like powerful immune system booster, a major detoxifier, antibacterial, anti-nausea, so it eases vomiting, antimicrobial, breaks up mucus, treats a wide range of infections, reduces fever. You can see why I call it the cure-all for everything. It's great to just even have on hand if you're particularly susceptible. And I like to use it as salad dressing. I like to use it in my salsa or my guacamole. I like to throw it on roasted potatoes. I like to toss it in mashed potatoes. I like to do sauteed greens like kale or collard greens or mustard greens and toss a little of that fire cider on top. It really is amazing. And then when I don't feel good or I feel like a cold is coming on, I just do shots of it, like straight up shots. What is fire cider? Well, basically you're taking a jar and you're filling it up with turmeric, horseradish, ginger, onions, garlic, lemons, spicy peppers, jalapeno, ghost peppers possibly, habaneros, like spicy peppers. And you're taking all that stuff, and I like to use apple slices, like big round apple slices on top to hold everything down. And you're filling it with apple cider vinegar. Traditionally fermented apple cider vinegar. Bragg's is a great brand for fermented apple cider, unpasteurized apple cider vinegar. And it's incredible. Now, it takes about 2 months for that to really cure and ferment. So you want to, that's why we start the workshop with that, so that by the time flu season really starts to hit, like in January, it's going to be ready for you. But I did last year actually have it sitting for a month when I felt a cold coming on, and I did a couple shots out of it just after a month, and it was great. So that's why we're doing the workshop right now, and that's why we're going to be using it. We're going to be kicking off the workshop with fire cider because it will be ready for you in time for flu season. All right, that's fire cider. The next week, we're going to do sauerkraut. I love me some sauerkraut. This also takes a long time, and most people say it takes about 2 months. I've definitely had clients who made sauerkraut with me and ate it after a week. No judgment. I like sauerkraut because the longer it sits, the different bacteria. So when you're going through fermentation, your bacteria changes as it gets older. And I like to have some really fresh, young ferments. And some of the ones we'll talk about later, you do in 2-3 days, you eat them. But I like sauerkraut because it's on the old end of the spectrum, and the longer it sits there, just the more rich and ridiculous that bacteria gets. You know, Christmas, a lot of people have sauerkraut with Christmas dinner, and New Year's. It's supposed to bring good luck to you on New Year's. And I think if you make your own sauerkraut for New Year's Eve, you get double good luck for the next year. Just throwing that out there. So in the workshop, I bring all sorts of stuff to flavor your sauerkraut with. So obviously the basic is cabbage. Somebody earlier asked me if they could not use cabbage because they didn't like cabbage. Savoy, so if cabbage is the cabbage-iest of all of these things, Savoy cabbage is a little less. Napa cabbage is even less. And then you can get into like the kales and the collards, and those are really not cabbagey at all. And you can make that with all of these things. I do suggest throwing some cabbage in there. Even if it's Savoy or a Napa cabbage, it's just so freaking good for you. But you can flavor it. So don't think that your kraut has to be just cabbage. You can throw apples, ginger. I mean, even just apples. You can do sour Granny Smith apples. You can do sweet apples. You can do ginger. You can do all kinds of different seeds. I know caraway is the most popular, but you can do cardamom. You can do all sorts of cool seeds. Sesame seeds, black sesame seeds. You can do carrots. You can do hot peppers. You can do a lot of different things. And I think, and fresh herbs. Don't discount your fresh herbs. They're delicious. I think last time when we did the sauerkraut class live, not one person copied another person. Everyone's kraut was completely different, and it was awesome. And then everyone goes home with a jar and a kraut pounder to make their next batch. So it's a total win-win for everybody. You can even throw in like broccoli and cauliflower and all these kinds of good things in that kraut. So have fun. And if you're a little hesitant about having brassica family vegetables, maybe you're hypothyroid or Hashimoto's, I definitely encourage you to still ferment and eat your kraut because you need those brassica family vegetables. They're really good for you, but the fermentation process neutralizes that goitrogenetic chemical in them that causes the slowing thyroid. So you don't want to eat them raw. And you do want to either ferment them or cook them, but definitely ferment them if you can, because you just win-win right there. All right. I'm going to say hi to the kitty that just jumped into my lap. She says hi back. And then check in on this poll. Mold is scary is the winner today for tonight. Mold is totally scary. Let's take a second and talk about mold. It's super scary, except that there's two schools of thought on mold. There's kind of the newer concept, the new age thought on mold, where you can buy more expensive things like airlocks, and that will keep the possibility of molds really at bay, but they are expensive. Or there's the old school theory, which is what Sandor Katz, the author of The Art of Fermentation, Westerning Price, right? He was a big part of this getting started, and Sandor Katz sort of continued it on as the next generation. Sandor Katz describes his sauerkraut process, where he has like a 10-gallon crock in his basement or something crazy. And he's got big wooden wheel on it that's a weight. Well, wood is porous, wood molds. So he pulls the wood off, scrubs it down, and he takes the whole top layer of the kraut off and tosses it. And then he scoops out a couple of layers, takes it upstairs to his refrigerator, and that's what he eats. He just scrapes the moldy top layer off, tosses it, and then eats from there. And he's served, I don't know, 100,000 people in his home at this point, because this is what he does, and to no issue. In my house, especially when I had the pop-up restaurant in the farmer's market booth, if something molded, I scraped the top layer off, I threw it in our personal house refrigerator, and we ate it. And I started a new batch to sell. The reason that I did that was that a lot of people came to my restaurant and my booth to purchase things because they were in a repressed state. Their immune system wasn't working well, or their gut wasn't working well, or they're trying to heal something. And I didn't want there to be any possibility that something that I served them could be a negative effect on them and their body. So I never served anything to customers. We ate it at home. Neither myself or my boyfriend have ever gotten sick from anything that's molded and that we've eaten. In fact, I've made hot sauce that started just a little start of mold on top. And I scraped as much as I could off, shook the crap out of that jar, and just ate it anyway, and was fine. So, I say scrape and keep going, but that has to be your own personal decision. And a lot of people just say, you know what, if it's molded, toss it and start over. And I know the argument, the mold spores go down into it, you'll never know. I know that argument, but as human beings, we evolved eating fermented foods, and there were no airlocks in 7,000 or 12,000 BC. And we buried shit in a leaf in the dirt, and then came back months, years later, dug it up and ate it. So gotta believe that we really evolved eating these things. And, there's a lot of mold in our diet. There's a lot of fungus in our diet already. Mushrooms and cheese, just to name two. And I know that they're different, and I know that they're different cultures, and I get that. And I know that there is bad mold out there. I totally am not discounting it. But I also think that we have people who are selling us higher priced goods than we really actually need. And using fear tactics when we don't really need them. And just whenever you have a moment of freak out, just remember that we used to bury food in a leaf and then come back years later and eat it. So try not to get too alarmist about things. I am very pragmatic and I'm a huge realist. And this is one of those times. Everyone makes their own personal decision. Don't sue me if you eat something moldy and it turns out poorly, but we do. And no one gets sick in my house like ever. Occasionally, once in like 3-4 years. Okay, so that being said, let's talk about kvass because it's week 3 of the workshop, and kvass was drunk in ancient Babel. They drank fruit kvass. The Egyptians drank grain kvass. These two groups both had kvass in their diets. We have proof that humans were fermenting in 7000 BC. Anthropologists, I shouldn't say we, but anthropologists guess that humans were fermenting beer in 12,000 BC. So we've been at this for a long time. And hey, you've all seen the videos of like squirrels and monkeys eating fermented pumpkins and whatnot that have been out and getting hammered and hilarious, right? So we definitely did the same thing. We may not have intentionally been fermenting things, but we definitely found it and ate it. We evolved with this bacteria. Like we can't live without it, and it obviously can't live without us. So we need to be a cohesive team. So fruit kvass is the original sports drink. It's full of electrolytes. It is super hydrating and really recharging and an energy boost. The Egyptians drank grain kvass, which is basically taking a loaf of bread, mushing it up with water, letting it ferment, and then straining the liquid off. And then finally, there's beet kvass, which is very popular, and it's almost a savory, like borscht. I have made it sweet with beets and honey. It's fine, but I really love the borscht, the savory version myself. There are 3 completely different processes for the same thing, which is weird, but it turns out kvass just means sour drink. So it kind of was one of those things that as we were discovering these things and as these words were being used in different parts of the world, kvass really just summed up anything that was a sour flavor, and these fermented foods are. The fruit kvass is actually quite sweet. It doesn't have to be. If you let it sit longer and ferment longer, it won't be quite as sweet. The beet kvass is savory, and the grain kvass, actually a lot of time, it's most typically with rye bread, and generally the grain kvass tastes like a beer. It doesn't have much alcohol, if any, in it, but it tastes very similar to a beer. In Russia today, it's the anti-Coke. It's marketed as the anti-Coke, and people drink, I believe the last time I looked at the numbers, it was 2/3 of the soda was kvass versus 1/3 of Coke, or like American Coke, Pepsi. So it's a really popular drink. I know, Russia hates us, so that might have something to do with it too. But it's a really popular drink in Russia. I'm sure it's delicious. I don't do the gluten thing anymore. I wish I'd tried it back when I still did, and maybe I will try it with a gluten-free bread one of these days and just see how it goes. But in the workshop, I'm going to teach you how to make fruit kvass and beet kvass. And I like these two because they're a different method. So when you're making sauerkraut, you're weighing your cabbage and you're measuring your salt, and then you're slicing your cabbage up and you're pounding the salt into the cabbage. As you're pounding the salt into the cabbage, you're breaking the cell wall and you're pulling the liquid out, and that's called self-brining. That liquid will eventually fill your vessel and your kraut will be below your brine line. In the cases kvass, this is a pour-over brine, and there's 2 kinds. There's a honey pour-over brine that you use for fruit kvass, and there's a savory salt pour-over brine that you use for beet kvass. Both of them are about a tablespoon per half gallon, I think, quart of liquid. I use less honey in mine because I don't really like sweet things, but you do have to, just like with salt, have quality honey. You can't buy honey from the grocery store. It has to be raw honey. Has to be raw honey. Can't be some weird thing from the grocery store, because those are mostly high fructose corn syrup, caramel food coloring, and a tiny bit of honey, and they can call it 100% honey. Doesn't even have to have, like, I don't even think it has to have 10% honey in it to actually be called honey. Yeah. So you want raw honey, and that you can get, I mean, more and more stores are actually carrying real raw honey. Co-ops are great. Farmers markets are great. There's lots of options out there. You want real raw honey. And natural yeasts that are in that honey is what kickstarts your ferment, just like the salt encourages the bad bacteria to die and the good bacteria to flourish, kicks off your ferments for your veggies. So same thing. So in the beet or the fruit kvass, you basically take a jar, fill it halfway with either fruit, if it's a fruit kvass, and any combination is good. I love blueberries and sage. Just throwing that out there. In the beet kvass, I do cabbage, a little bit of onion, and beets. And you want to put the heaviest thing on top. So like pineapple sticks or big chunks of beet, right, on top, because it'll weigh everything down. And then you fill the rest of the jar up with brine, keeping everything below the brine line, right? You fill everything up with brine, and then you stir it twice a day. And in about 3 days, you have a funky fermented electrolyte-filled beverage that is super good for you. And the beet kvass, because it's a fermented beet beverage, people have an easier time getting the iron from the beets after it's been fermented than they do just eating iron-rich vegetables, even cooked. So just throwing that out there, fermentation is awesome. I love having beet kvass, and I keep it in my fridge, and I find that usually the first couple days of my period, I love beet kvass. Can't imagine why. So those kvasses are your pour over kvass. So now we've got the vinegar. The only way you can do a vinegar brine with the fire cider. We have the pour over brine with the kvass, and we have the self-brining method with the sauerkraut. Now we're going to talk about kombucha, which is actually a mother culture brine or ferment. Apple cider vinegar has a mother culture, and kombucha has a mother. They're both different. The kombucha one is called a SCOBY, which stands for a symbiotic colony of bacteria and yeast. It is actually a bunch of bacteria and yeast, little guys that have formed a colony, and it looks like an alien jellyfish. And every year for Halloween, we take all of the extra SCOBYs that are in the refrigerator and we put them in weird different colored liquid glass jars around the apartment and freak people out because they're super gross and awesome. So look, I'm even giving you Halloween decoration advice today. Get some SCOBYs, put them around your house, be a mad scientist or a kitchen witch, which I usually do one of those two things every year for Halloween, and then just scare everybody with your weird stuff. It's perfect. So kombucha is basically fermented sweet tea. Fruit kvass and kombucha can sometimes get an ABV, an alcohol by volume number of 0.05 to 1.5, really on the highest outside. So if you're particularly sensitive to alcohol, you're going to want to make sure that you don't let these ferment very long so that the alcohol is not so high. The longer they ferment, the higher the alcohol, until you've gotten so far that they're vinegar, and then that's a whole different thing. Kombucha is, you make kombucha with that SCOBY and a little bit of starter. So a good way to do it is to buy a kombucha from the grocery store as like your starter. You can get SCOBYs online. I mean, I sell them for like $10. They're my organic, grown in organic sugar and tea mixes. You can get them all over the place and for fairly cheap. So feel free to contact me if you want one. But the scobies are really great, and I give them to everyone at the workshop, of course. You take that, you take your starter, and you make a batch of sweet tea. And again, sugar, use an organic, non-GMO sugar, and white sugar is fine. The SCOBY actually really likes white sugar. If you use something like coconut sugar, whatever you make is all going to be brown. The color is going to be brown, and it's going to taste really molassesy. Agave, I mean, there's no difference between agave and sugar. I don't spend the money on agave. There's no point. It's still a processed sugar. Beet sugar, GMO. Cane sugar, yes. Honey, no. In this case, actually, honey, because of its antibacterial properties, will kill your SCOBY over time. So you don't want that. So sugar, just really good non-GMO cane sugar, organic cane sugar is the way to go. Especially if you want it to look pretty, because the white sugar doesn't change the color. Keep in mind that the kombucha SCOBY is going to eat the sugar. So the amount of sugar, which is a cup per gallon, is going to be eaten by the SCOBY. And the longer you let it ferment, the more sugar it will eat until it's just vinegar that's left. And you can have kombucha vinegar. And we do a lot of kombucha vinegars. I do a basil kombucha vinegar fairly regularly and a jalapeno kombucha vinegar. Those are our two favorites. Though I do have a rose kombucha vinegar happening right now that I'm super stoked to try. I'm saving it for the workshop. But yeah, kombucha vinegar is freaking delicious. And it's a great vinegar alternative, especially because you're going to have kombucha that just, it gets away from you. It gets really hot in the summer. You've got a lot. You don't know what to do with it. Just let it become vinegar and then have vinegar and never buy vinegar again. You can flavor it with anything. So, you know, throwing that out there. One of the questions I get about kombucha a lot is that candida is really prevalent, especially in our culture. And kombucha has been known to aggravate candida. I've had one client so far with really bad candida. In some cases, kombucha actually acts as a leveling of candida. So candida is a form of yeast, and kombucha is yeast, right? It's a colony of bacterium yeast. Just like eating good bacteria, like fermented foods, kills off the bad bacteria that may have taken up residence in your gut, the good bacteria, or the good yeast in kombucha can kill off the bad yeast in candida. The trick is knowing your body and knowing if that's the die-off that you're experiencing or if it's flaring up the candida. So I had one client with really bad candida. We had her doing sauerkraut, which was working out really well for her. And we decided to try a little bit of kombucha, and immediately her face flushed out red. And that's an allergic reaction. So we stopped the kombucha immediately. Of course, that wasn't a detox. That was a flare up of the candida. So you really want to, if candida is a problem with you, you can try it, but just try a really small amount and see how you feel before you go full-fledged into it. And that was an awesome question from my last workshop, actually, and I think it's really important to talk about. Okay, so then we talked about vinegar. Kombucha vinegar is sweet and awesome. I've made hibiscus kombucha, and it was in the middle of 110-degree summer in Los Angeles, and it got away from me. So we added raspberries to it and made bright red raspberry hibiscus vinegar. Amazing. Have one bottle of that left, also saving it for the workshop. And then my last note on vinegar is that white vinegar, that stuff that you get in 5-gallon jugs at Costco, keep buying, but clean your kitchen with it. Use it as fabric softener in your washer and dryer. It kills bacteria. It's amazing cleaning agent. In fact, when I worked in restaurants, the best chefs that I knew kept that bucket of bleach that the health department requires you to have on the side, but they used white vinegar to clean down at the end of the night every night because it was the most thorough cleaning, and they never had a problem in their kitchens. I even had a health services, because I had to certify every year, tell me that he really recommended keeping white vinegar to clean your kitchen, but keeping the health department required bleach on the side. And I saw a few chefs doing that in some really good restaurants in New York and Los Angeles. So use it. Just don't use it for your food. Okay, so we've got 2 more weeks in the workshop that will actually be hands-on fermenting, chutney and fruit. So chutney is basically any combination of foods that's sweet, savory, and spicy. I mean, they don't have to be all 3, but usually they are. And chutneys were traditionally made, left out in the hot Middle Eastern sun to ferment. So when people start talking to me again about airlocks and temperature controls, I just think the chutney is from India and the Middle East. And all of those cultures just left their chutney out in the frickin' sun to ferment. So I can't get behind the alarmist thing. I love chutney. Last year for the workshop, we had a bunch of different people make chutneys, but the 3 most popular ones are a pineapple chutney, often with jalapenos as the spice, pineapple as the sweet, cilantro as the savory, mango, chili, lime, even a little basil is a really popular one, a little onion maybe. And then apples, onions, and raisins are another really popular chutney. And there's 2 ways to ferment chutney. And here we're going to talk about whey. So you've heard of curds and whey? Well, whey is the liquid that drops out of yogurt. So if you went to buy just a regular yogurt, not Greek yogurt, but just regular yogurt, and you tied it up in a thick towel or cheesecloth, and the liquid that drops out of that is your whey. Now you have Greek yogurt in your bag, and you have whey on the side. Whey is good for ferments for a few things if this is attractive to you. It's great because your chances of mold go way down with whey. Way down with whey. The problem with that is that whey doesn't, whatever the bacteria, the bacteria in your particular whey is the only bacteria you'll have in your ferment. So if you're fermenting everything with whey, you have no variety to the bacteria culture in your microbiome, in your stomach, in your intestinal tract. You really want to have diversity. So if you do ferment with whey, try to only do one thing with whey, because that's it. That's your one type right there. And I mean, if you're eating yogurt, there it is. It's right there. One of the perks to whey and one of the downsides to whey is that it mushes up your veggies. So if you're making something with whey, your veggies are going to get really mushy much quicker, which can be great. And especially if you're making a chutney that you want to use as like a spread, it's really nice actually. But if you want to use chutney like on your fish or on a burger or with your beans, you probably want it to be a little bit more chunky and you want it to not be mushy, and in which case you don't want to use whey. I absolutely have used it for my own home consumption for things when I wanted to try like a spread. It kind of comes out like the consistency of apple butter. I didn't use it in any of my other stuff though, because dairy allergies are really prevalent, and I didn't want anyone coming into my restaurant or my farmer's market booth to have to say no to something because it had a dairy product in it. So I didn't use it very much, but I did use it on occasion for myself. It's not a bad thing. It's just don't make every recipe out there has whey in it. And I get it because it ensures that the reader will have less chance of mold and a higher success rate. So you'll come back to their site over and over and over again, but they're depriving you of the variety that's in your fermented foods. So, okay. The fruit ferment is really easy in that you're basically just taking fruit, filling up a jar, putting some honey in it, and then shaking it twice a day until that honey covers the fruit. You've got a very viscous, almost like pancake syrup quality to it. And in about 3 days, it turns to booze. So if you want to know how to ferment your own booze at home, you take honey and you put it in water and it will become mead. And if you put berries or herbs or whatever in it, it will become that flavor mead. If you ferment berries in honey and you leave it out for more than a few days in a row, it will turn into booze. And if you take a spoonful of that and throw it in water, you will have an alcoholic mead-like beverage as well. I have a jar of raspberry honey that I fermented, raspberries and honey, and I've eaten all the raspberries, but the honey is still there. And it was from our last workshop. And it's been about 6 months since the last workshop. And I put a spoonful of it on my yogurt the other morning and I was kind of drunk. I was a little like, whoa, okay, maybe I shouldn't have done that on an empty stomach first in the morning. Live and learn. You could do shots of it though, and it would get you pretty hammered. But we don't do that. We put it in the refrigerator after about 3 days so that it's in the fridge and it doesn't get like that so quickly. But that being said, another drink, tepache, which is actually the rinds of pineapple and brown sugar, or I use coconut sugar, also gets pretty boozy pretty quick. It tastes delicious. It tastes like, a brown sugar and pineapple. It's freaking delicious. You throw some cinnamon and some vanilla in there, and it's a really good drink. But that is very boozy after a while. And I used to sell it at the farmer's market, and there was a period of time where I had to stop putting it out and letting people try it because it was booze. And have to make a fresh batch. Definitely wasn't going to sell it to kids without carding them first. And I have a good friend who has a very traditional Mexican family, and the first time he came over and had tepache that had gone to booze with me, he laughed and said, now I understand why my grandmother always kept us in the kitchen and wouldn't let the men or the kids in the kitchen. Only the women were allowed to come in the kitchen during holidays to cook and make the feasts for everybody, and they were the only ones allowed to drink out of the tepache pot. Now I know why. Because it was booze. So I thought that was really kind of amazing and I loved it. And I thought, you know what, that's such a classic story. Like I can see every grandmother in the world with their own personal like booze stash in the kitchen, and that's how they deal with the family gatherings. I thought it was amazing, hilarious. And he went home and had a stern talking with his grandmother about that. She was right, he was a kid. So one of the things about whey is that it eliminates the alcohol, because whey changes how your food ferments and it doesn't go through the fermentation process and the different stages of the bacteria growth. It doesn't convert to alcohol. So if you don't want alcohol for whatever reason, whey actually will stop the alcohol process from growing. So if you want to make something and you're afraid it might get a little boozy, you can throw whey in it and it will prevent the alcohol from forming in your ferments. And then one of the questions I always get is, great, so you're saying these things are ready when they're ready, but how do I know when they're ready? Well, they are ready when you start to see them bubble, when you start to see them getting effervescent, when you walk into your kitchen first thing in the morning and it's really quiet and all you hear is because the things that you're growing in your kitchen are alive and they're exhaling. And it's amazing. And it's such a beautiful sound to walk into your kitchen. And I mean, there was a period of time where I had, 10, 15 different bottles going on the kitchen at the same time. And they were all bubbling at the same time. And you walked in the kitchen and I was like, oh my God, it's really kind of loud in here right now. It's amazing. It's an amazing sound. So when you see your ferments bubbling, when the liquid is bubbling up and over the jars, or when this just hissing is escaping, that's when it's really active. And as soon as the bubbles die down, you can start tasting. You can open the jar, taste things, because now everything underneath that brine is in the oxygen-free anaerobic environment. This is where you want it to be. So you can start tasting things, and then when you're ready, you can stick them in the fridge. Stick them in the fridge, stick them in the fridge, stick them in the fridge, and they're ready for you whenever you want to come back. All right? So that's the sound of fermentation, and that's how you know when things are ready. The The last week of the workshop is it's the 7th week, and it's a dinner. And in the dinner, I make a huge dinner for everybody, and it's all of the ferments that we've made, and each dish features something from our ferments, and it's delicious and it's amazing. It was such a fun time. And last year I had 5 people in my fermentation workshop, or earlier this year I had 5 people in my fermentation workshop, and we had such an amazing dinner at the end of the course with everybody. And the people who weren't able to missed a class or weren't able to attend a class or whatever got that chance to make what they missed. So if you can't attend everything, there's 2 options for you. And I'm gonna put up an offer for you guys. First of all, if you're in Los Angeles, this first one is for you. If you're not in Los Angeles, hang tight for the second offer because it's really good. This first offer is for anyone who's in Los Angeles that wants to attend the workshop live. It's $100 off. And I'm basically just covering my costs with the $100 off ticket. So do this, because I don't think I'm going to do it like this again. I think I'm going to up the price next time. But you're getting all of the jars, all of the muddlers, the claws, everything you need, knife skills, because we're going to be making everything together. You get to taste everything, take home everything. And if you miss a class or something dies and you want to redo, we'll do it. So we'll do it on the last week when we have our dinner. We'll go over what people missed and finish up follow-up questions and make anything anyone missed. Last year we had a couple of them, and it was great. We just had an extra bottle of wine after dinner and hung out and fermented the rest of the missing and makeup. And we had one person who had I think her chutney. I think it was her chutney that molded. So we had her redo it and make it up at the last class. So it was a really quite amazing experience. And I want to make sure that you guys can come in and do it. But you go home with everything. It's great for the holidays, right? Because the holidays are coming up, and you can have handmade goods to pass out to your friends and family, and you don't have to stress out about it, which is kind of delightful, right? So that's a really good one. And if you're here in LA, I really highly encourage you to do this. We're going to do it in my apartment, in my crazy kitchen witch house, in this weird, awesome loft downtown. And I really do hope to see you there, because it's going to be a lot of fun. All right, so I'm going to take this offer down. So hopefully everyone saw the code, WJS100. You can take it to the website if you click that sign me up button, and just put that code in the coupon code part of the website, and check out with that $100 off, which is a steal. Please don't share that code. It was for people who were here live, and I want to give you guys a bonus for coming and being part of this. Okay, the next bonus is for the virtual workshop. So this offer is for all of you long distance fermenters. It is the webinar version. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to set up the computer, and you can watch and follow along as I make everything, and the live and person people are making everything. And you'll get to learn even more about all of these ferments. You'll get to see exactly how it goes. You'll be able to follow it along, whether you're here live or in person. I have a Facebook group. In that Facebook group, only you guys will have access to. We will exchange recipes. We'll exchange pictures of our ferments. You'll be able to post something and say, hey, does this look weird? Or, hey, this is awesome. Or, everyone should try this. You'll be able to help other people. You'll be able to comment on other people's stuff. I'm going to post my notes for the slides that I use for the workshop classes. You'll have my salt guides and all that good stuff. So you know all the salt ratios for everything. And you'll get to be part of some of my really favorite recipes. And I mean, when we go into detail on these things, believe me, I've made it all at this point, and you're going to love it. So nothing that we do, you won't have the option to make it personalized and exactly how you want. In the Facebook group, I'm going to be throwing you guys grocery lists. So if you're following along at home, you'll know what you're going to need for the upcoming workshop. And if you're here with us, I'll have it ready and waiting for you when you get here. We start November 9th. We're going to be doing it in the evening, and whether you're here live in person or you're on the webinar, I'm going to record them, and you can, if you can't make it live for whatever reason, you can watch the replay. And then you'll have the replays. They'll be available for you to download, keep for yourself. So that's all part of it. And if you do the webinar version, it's going to be even cooler because it's only $10 a class. You don't get all the good stuff. You're going to have to go out and buy your own. So if you're here live and in person, it's all for you, ready to go. And that's the big difference, is we'll be here live and in person drinking wine and enjoying ourselves. So I really do hope that I've answered all your questions. I don't see anything over here in the chat bar as far as questions are concerned. So let's see. It's just after 8. Awesome. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining us. If you have any follow-up questions, please let me know. Feel free to hit me up on Facebook or in the Wild Fermentation Facebook group, or email me anything. You can hit reply to the webinar links that you got to get here. Yeah, I'm so thankful for you guys for being on here and playing and participating in the polls and everything. I'm really glad you were here for this, and I cannot wait to see you in the workshop kicking off at the beginning of next month. Happy fermenting, guys, to your health. Have an amazing evening.